Settle yourself now, and let the lamp burn low, and let the doors of the day swing shut one by one behind you, for I have a long, quiet story to tell you tonight, and it is a story best heard the way I first heard it, which is by a low fire, with someone you trust doing the talking, and nothing at all required of you, but to lie still and breathe, and let the words come over you like water over. Stones, you may sleep now whenever you like, whenever your eyes decide the matter for you. But stay with me a while yet if you can, because there is a place I want to take you to first, high up on the English wold under a great sky, and I want you to see it while it is still standing, before the grass has it. Let me begin, as these things ought to begin, on a single night, a real and dated night, the 14th of October in the year 1873, an autumn night on the high wold with a cold clean wind coming out of the north, and the last of the light gone violet and grey along the far ridges. And let me put one man in a field with a lantern, an old man now, though not so old in years as he seemed, the Reverend Theophilus Bray, rector of a parish that had almost no one left in it to be rector of, standing alone in a wide empty sheep pasture at the place where for 600 years a church had stood, and watching the last of it go. Picture him. He is not a large man, the wind pushes at his black coat, and he lets it. He holds the lantern low and a little away from his body, the way a man holds a light when he wants to see the ground and not his own hands, and the yellow of it swims and gutters over the wet grass and over a low broken shoulder of grey stone, no higher than his knee, which is the very last of a wall that once rose in 3 grave arches over the heads of a whole living parish, and rang with the voices of hundreds of people who are all of them, every last one, gone down long ago into the dark ground he is standing on. That morning the last standing stone of it had fallen. Not thrown down, you understand, not pulled down by any hand, for there was no one left to want it down and no one left to want it up. It had simply, after the long, slow patience of the weather and the frost getting into the mortar winter on winter, leaned and at last, in the small hours, in the dark, with no one watching, gone over quietly into the grass with a sound that nobody heard, and Bray had come up in the evening to stand where it had been. That is all he did. He did not weep, or not that anyone saw. He did not pray aloud, though his lips may have moved. He stood in the field with his lantern, and he looked at the place where the church had been, and where the village had been long before the church was even old, and he took off his hat to the empty air, and he stood bareheaded in the cold until the light was quite gone, and then he walked back down the dark lane to the small stone rectory, where a fire was lit and a lamp was burning in the window for him, and he sat down at his desk, and he opened his notebook, and he wrote in it. Hold on to the notebook. I want you to hold on to it right from the start, because a story like this one needs something to carry the ending in, the way a man walking out into weather needs something to carry a light in, and the notebook is that thing. It was a thick book bound in worn brown calf, and he had been filling it for the better part of 40 years, filling it in a small even scholar's hand with everything he had been able to learn, or copy, or measure, or reason out about the vanished place. Every name he could recover from the old rolls, every field and its old field name, every lane and where it had run, every family and where its house had stood and when it had emptied, the whole shape of a town that no living eye had ever seen whole, patiently reassembled out of humps in the grass and worm, eaten parchment by one stubborn loving man, who had decided, somewhere in his middle years, that though he could not save the place and could not raise it, he would not, at the least, let it go out of the world unremembered while he had breath and ink. And when he had written what he came to write that October night, he set down the pen, and he closed the book. And now, before we go one step further into the story, before we go up over the wold into the summer of it and see the place alive, I am going to do a thing I will do more than once tonight, which is to jump clean over the years and tell you the end of a thing at the beginning, so that your heart can rest, so that you are not lying there in the dark holding your breath to know what became of it, because this is a story for slowing down and not for keeping you on the edge of anything, and a worry set down early is a worry you can sleep through. So let me tell you what became of the notebook. Bray died, in the fullness of time and quietly in his own bed, and the notebook, along with certain other things I will come to, was put into a chest, a plain iron-bound chest. And the chest was closed, and, as happens, as so often gently and stupidly happens, it was set aside and forgotten, moved to an attic, moved to a cellar, moved through an auction and a house clearing and the deaths of people who never knew what they were moving, and it sat in the dark for the better part of 100 years, closed, with a whole town shut up inside it, waiting the way the town itself was waiting under the grass. And then one day, a long way from that October field, generations on, someone opened it. I will not tell you tonight exactly who. That is a thread for later, and it wins, as you may already half suspect, all the way to me and to the fire I am speaking to you from. But someone opened the chest, and lifted out the thick brown book, and sat down with it, not meaning to read much, only to see what it was, and did not get up again until it was finished. Read it in one sitting, from the cold October night at the front of it clean back through 40 years to the very first page, understanding slowly and then all at once what it was they were holding, which was not a diary and not a history exactly, but something rarer, a whole living place caught and kept, a town remembered on purpose by a man who loved it, and understanding too, with the particular quiet shock that comes only once or twice in a life, that the field the book described, the ordinary green sheep field with the humps in it, was a real field that still existed and could still be walked, and that a person could go and stand in it, as I have stood in it, and know that they were standing on the roof of a town. So hold that. Hold that above everything else I tell you tonight, and let it be the thing your mind rests on if you drift, that out there, right now, tonight, while you lie warm and safe under your own roof, there is a high green field under a wide English sky, and it looks like nothing. It looks like grass. It looks like the kind of empty upland place you would drive past without a thought, and under it, held in the earth the way a word is held in a closed book, is a whole vanished parish. Not a ruin you can see, not a romantic broken abbey with its arches open to the moon. Nothing you could photograph and call a ruin at all. Only grass and sheep and the wind and, if you know how to look, if someone has taught your eye the way Bray's eye was taught, the faint green humps and hollows where the streets ran and the houses stood, low swellings and dips in the turf no higher than a sleeping animal's flank, which are the buried footings of cottages and the sunk lines of lanes and the raised platform where the manor sat, and, running away across the slope in long parallel waves like the ghost of a sea that never was, the ridge and furrow, the corduroy of the old ploughlands, the very shape the strips were left in when the last ox team was unhitched and led away and the plough never came back. A market once stood there, a mill turned there. Children were born and named and buried there over 500 and 600 years. And it is all still there, every foot of it, held under the grass, not destroyed so much as covered, not gone so much as kept. A village swallowed, and here is the thing I want you to carry all night, swallowed not by the sea, not by any flood or any tide, but by grass, by pasture, by the slow green patience of the turf and the slower patience of the years, which give and take with the very same motion, and cannot be fought, only answered. Now let me widen this a little before we go up into the light, because I do not want you to think this is a story about strangers, about some far and particular place that has nothing to do with you lying there. If your people came from these islands, from England or from Scotland or from Wales or from Ireland, from any of the old close-packed places that the centuries have quietly emptied, the glens the sheep were run over and the villages the work drained out of, and the parishes that dwindled to a church and a farm, and then to a name on a map, and then to nothing at all, then this story is partly yours, more yours than you know, because somewhere back along your own line there was almost certainly a place like this one, a place your people were of before they were of anywhere else, a place they left, or were made to leave, or drifted from a household at a time the way water drifts from a fen, until it emptied behind them and closed over like grass closing over a footprint. You may not know its name. Most of us do not know the name. That is rather the point of a story like this, and rather the reason I tell it. I know a little of my own, because it was told to me, and I will tell you how it was told to me, because it is how I want you to receive the whole of tonight. My grandmother told it to me. She was an old woman by the time I was small enough to sit at her feet, and large enough to remember it, and she lived far across the water in Nova Scotia, in a low white house near the shore, and her people had come out of these very islands generations back, with next to nothing but the clothes on them, and a few words and a few stories, and she used to tell those stories in the evening, in the long blue maritime evenings, sitting by the fire, and here is the detail I have never forgotten and never will. The detail that is really the whole of her. She would tell them with the doors left open. Both doors, front and back, propped open to the summer dark and the sound of the sea, even when the moths came in, even when it was cool, because, she said, a story is a thing you let out of the house and let into the house, a thing that has to be able to come and go, and you do not tell a good story in a shut room. So that is how I mean to tell you this one. Doors open, nothing shut, you free to drift out on it whenever you like and drift back, and the story itself free to go out from me to you, and, one day, if you keep it, out from you to someone else, because that, in the end, is the only kind of keeping there is, and it is enough, and I will show you tonight exactly how it is enough. But not yet. First, before any of the losing, before the grass, I owe you the place alive. It would be a cruelty to show you only the empty field. It would be like showing you a photograph of an old man and never telling you he was once a laughing child, and I will not do it. So let me take you up now, back over all the years, back over the fallen wall and the plague and the 600 quiet dyings, up into the high summer of the place when it did not know and could not have dreamed that it was mortal, when it stood full and gold and certain of itself under the sun. And I want you to come up the hill with me the way a traveller would have come, on foot in the long light of a summer evening, so that you crest the rise and see it all at once, laid out below you, alive so. It is an evening in high summer, and the year does not matter, but let us say it is somewhere in the good years. The full years, before the great dying came, when the parish was at its height. The village of Wold Osmond, that is its name. Hold the name gently. Wold Osmond, a village on the top of the world with the wind combing the long grass and the larks going up. You come up the green lane out of the low country, tired and glad, and the lane climbs and climbs between banks white with cow parsley and loud with bees, and then it lifts you up over the last shoulder of the hill, and there it is below you and around you, and you stop, the way every traveller stopped, to take it in. First the smell of it, wood smoke and cut hay and byre and bread, the good brown smell of a working place. Then the sound, and oh, the sound of it. Because a living village is never for one instant silent, and this one is singing to itself in the evening in a dozen voices at once, the deep slow tolling of the church bell counting the hour up over the roofs. 1, 2, 3. The strokes rolling out and off across the fields and coming faintly back off the far hills, and under the bell the endless small talk of the place, the plough teams being brought in with a man's low voice at their heads, and the creak of harness, and the great soft feet of the oxen on the trodden lane. And geese, always geese, a whole indignant nation of geese down by the green pond making their racket at nothing, and children. A thin high scribble of children's voices somewhere among the houses, that sound that is the same in every century and every tongue, running and calling and shrieking with laughter in the last of the light before they are called in, and a dog and another dog answering it, and, if the wind lulls, the small iron clink 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 of the smith still at his forge in the cool of the evening, hammering out a little more day. Now look at it. Look down the slope. A great scatter of low houses, 40 of them, 50, more, timber and mud and thatch, humble and warm and huddled companionably, along 2 or 3 curving lanes that all run down toward the green and the pond at the heart of it, the thatch gone silver gold in the low sun. And from the smoke hole of every one of them, a straight blue thread of hearth smoke, standing up dead straight into the still evening air. Because the day's wind has dropped, and the smoke goes up unbending toward the first stars. And I want you to fix on those threads of smoke, those hearth lights, every one of them a fire that someone is keeping, a family gathered in around it, because the kept hearth is a thing you and I will come back to again and again through the dark tonight, the small tended flame, and here at the height of the village there are 50 of them at once. 50 fires lit, and not one soul in that whole place who could believe that a day would come when there would be none. There is the church, of course, the grey stone church that outlasted everything, standing a little apart and a little above on its low knoll with the churchyard around it, and the great yews black-green in the corners, and it is newish, in that summer, or newer than it will ever be again, its stone still pale and sharp-edged, its tower square and plain and strong against the gold sky, and in the tower hangs the bell, the same bell, remember it, the parish bell, the Sanctus bell, swinging out the hours over the living town, calling them to work and calling them to worship, and calling them, in their time, home, and it does not know, the bell does not know, that it will one day toll for the whole place, and then be lost in the dark ground for centuries, and then, when everything else is gone, be found and lifted and made to speak again and keep a promise. It knows none of that. Tonight it is only ringing the hour over the smoke and the geese and the children. 3, 4, 5. There is the manor, larger than the rest, up beyond the church, with its own great barn and its dovecote, where the Lord's steward keeps the roll. There is the mill down at the beck where the ground falls away, its wheel turning slow and heavy in its low grinding note under everything, the good sound of bread being made from the fields. There is the market cross, a plain worn shaft of stone on 3 steps at the meeting of the lanes by the green, where on market days the folk of all the little places round about would come in to buy and sell, and where now, in the evening quiet, an old man sits on the bottom step to rest his legs and watch the teams come home. And there, all around and above and below the houses, sweeping up the slopes on every side to the very skyline, are the fields, the great open fields of the parish, not hedged and squared as you know fields now, but open and vast and striped green and gold and brown in long parallel bands, the strips of the common ploughing, each family's few strips scattered fair among the rest. The whole hillside combed into these long shining ridges by the ox plough, going up and back, for generation on generation, so that the very ground is grooved with their patient work like the grain in a plank. And it is those ridges, those long waves of the old ploughing, that will still be there, unploughed and unbroken, 600 years after the last plough is led away, waiting in the grass for a man with a lantern to walk them and read them, and grieve over them, and set them down in a brown book. But tonight they are alive, tonight they are green, with the standing corn moving all together in the evening air like the pelt of a great breathing animal, and the whole hill breathes with them, up and down. One long slow exhalation of a place entirely at peace with itself, and entirely certain, as places and people always are, and always wrongly are, that this is how it is, and how it will always be. Stand up there a moment longer with me, and just have it. Have the whole of it at once. The smoke standing straight up in 50 threads, the bell rolling out 6 now, 6 slow strokes, and the last one dying away long and soft into the folds of the hills. The geese, the children being called in, one name and then another floating up thin and clear. The plough teams down in the lanes, the mills low grinding, the gold light lying along the tops of the corn and turning every western-facing wall and every thatch to honey. Hundreds of people down there in that fold of the hills, hundreds of souls, being born and dying and marrying and quarrelling and forgiving and ploughing and praying and keeping their small fires lit, A whole world, complete, sufficient, loved by the people in it, in the ordinary unspoken way people love the only place they have ever known. And every single one of them believing, as they closed their doors that night and banked their fires and went up to bed under that same square tower and that same quiet bell, that Wold Osmond would stand on that hill until the last day of the world. Hold that picture. I want you to lie there and hold it, the village alive and gold and full, because I am not going to be able to give it back to you once we go on, not whole like this, not ever again tonight, and that is the truth of the thing and the whole shape of what I have to tell you. Because now the story goes down. It goes down slowly, an acre and a winter and a family at a time, the way these things really go, without one great crash, without any single night you could point to and say, there, that was when it ended. Only a long, patient, gentle lowering of the light, hearth by hearth, over 300 and 400 years, until the fires are all out and the last wall is down in the grass and an old man is standing in a field with a lantern in the cold. And it does not come back up. I will not lie to you in the dark and pretend it comes back up. The village does not return. The people do not return. The grass has it and keeps it, and that is real, and it is the sorrow at the centre of the whole night. But I promise you two things before we start down, and you may hold them the way you are holding the picture of the smoke. The first is that everything I show you going down will be shown gently, cushioned, laid down soft, because this is a channel for sleeping and not a place for sharp grief, and I mean to bring you all the way to the bottom of this story and out the other side into peace, and I know the road, and I will not let you fall on it. And the second is a stranger promise, and I will only whisper it now and make it good later, when we are much further down and much deeper into the dark, that though the place is lost utterly, lost past any saving, it is also, in the end, kept by a man with a notebook, and by a woman with a lamp in a window, and by a line of writing left by a priest 600 years ago, and by a bell laid on its side in the dark ground meaning to be found, and that a thing remembered on purpose by someone who loves it is a thing that grass, like the sea, for all its patience, cannot quite reach. But that is the far end of the night, and we have the whole long quiet middle to cross first. And there is no hurry, none at all. The lamp is burning low and steady, and there is oil enough in it for hours. So be glad you saw the village alive. Keep the gold light. Keep the 50 threads of smoke going straight up into the still air, and the bell over the roofs and the children being called in. And when you are ready, you need not be ready yet, we will go down off the summer hill together, softly, into the first of the years that took it. Now I must take you back, gently, to the village as you last saw it, full and gold-lit, and certain of itself, because before the long, slow leaving there came one summer that broke its back while it still stood whole. And I want you to understand that it did not fall the way a wall falls, all at once and with a sound, but the way a great tree is hollowed by a slow rot years before the wind that finally lays it down, so that the wind gets the name of the killing, though the killing was done long before. Say the year to yourself, softly, the way you might say a name at a graveside. 1349. It is only a number, and I told you at the start that the dates would not keep you awake, and they will not. I do not mean to lay them out for you like coins on a counter, so many struck in this reign and so many in that, because that is not how a village remembers its own dying, and it is not how I mean to tell it to you. A village does not remember by dates. A village remembers by empty places at a table, by a plough left in a furrow it never came back to finish, by a name said less and less often until it is not said at all, and then, one still evening years on, said once more by an old woman who had thought she had forgotten it, and who is surprised, and a little glad, and a little undone, to find it still there in her mouth like a stone under the tongue. So I will give you the 1 year, and then I will let it go, because it is enough. 1349. In the spring of it, up on the high wold, the village of Wold Osmond was as I showed it to you, hundreds of souls, the smoke standing straight, the strips striped green and gold, the grey church with its one good bell, the pond and the mill and the cross and the geese, the whole ordinary imperishable weight of a place that has been there so long that no one living can imagine it not being there, and by the autumn of the same year, before the leaves were fully down, more than half of them were in the ground. I will not dwell on the how of it. This is a channel for sleeping and not for frightening, and there is a kind of storyteller who would take a night like this and make a horror of it, and lean on the fear of it, and press you down into the worst of it until you could not look away, and I am not that teller, and this is not that telling. There is nothing here for you to be afraid of. It is 600 and more years gone. Every soul in it is long at rest. What I want to give you of that summer is not the sickness but the faithfulness, not the dying but the burying, because it is in the burying that the truest thing about that village shows itself, and it is a thing worth being awake for one more little while before you drift. So let me bring in the man I want you to carry with you through these years, the way I asked you to carry the church and the bell and the humps in the grass. One more thing to keep, and this one is a man. There was in that grey church a priest. I will call him Father Edmund, because that is near enough to the name the old rolls give, and because it is a good plain name for a good plain man, and he was, by every scratch of ink that survives of him, a good plain man. He was not clever in the way that gets a man moved up and out to a soft cathedral post. He was clever only in the small dogged way that keeps a parish register in order and a churchyard decently kept, and remembers which of the old widows takes her broth thin and which takes it thick. He was broad and slow and kind. He had come to Wold Osmond young, the way Bray would come to it old 500 years later, and hold on to that two men so far apart in time would both give their lives to the same patch of grass, because I will bring them together for you before the night is done, and he had thought, when he came, that he would live his whole life in a place that stayed the same, marry the young and christen their children, and bury the old and marry the young again, round and round, the wheel of it turning slow and sure under his hands, until his own turn came to be buried in the same ground by whatever young priest should come after him. That is what he thought his life would be. It is what most lives are, and it is a good life, and there is no shame in wanting nothing more than to be the faithful keeper of a small turning wheel, and for a good many years that is what he had. Picture him at his work, because I want you to have him clearly, the way you have the bell. It is winter, the winter before the bad summer, though he does not know yet that a bad summer is coming, because no one ever does. He is at a small table by a small window in the cold room where the parish keeps its chest and its rolls. There is a rushlight burning, one thin reed dipped in fat giving a poor guttering light that he leans close over, and his breath stands white in the air of the room, and he blows on his fingers between the lines to keep them from stiffening, and he writes. He is copying the manor roll fair, who holds which strip, and of whom, and for what rent and what service, so many days ploughing owed to the Lord, and so many hens at Christmas, and so many eggs at Easter, and the parish register beside it, the plainer and dearer book, the book of the souls themselves, christened here, and married here, and buried here, the in and the out of the whole village written in his slow, careful hand. He is not a fast writer. He forms each letter the way a man lays each stone in a wall he means to last, and the rolls he keeps are, an antiquarian would tell you 6 centuries later, uncommonly clean and uncommonly complete for so small and so poor a place, as though the man who kept them knew, without being able to say how he knew, that one day these books would be all that was left, and that the least he could do for the people passing under his pen was to spell their names right and set them down straight, so that if nothing else of them endured, at least their names would be legible to whoever came after. At his elbow, on the table, close enough to touch, there is a small handbell, not the great bell of the tower, but a little sanctus bell he can carry, and I want you to notice it there beside him, because a bell is going to be the whole heart of this story, and I am putting one at his elbow now, the way you put a thing where you will want it later. When he has written his fill, or when the rushlight burns too low, he stands, and his knees are not what they were. And he goes to the little window and looks out over the sleeping village, and this is the picture I most want you to keep of him. A broad, slow, kind old priest at a cold window with white breath, looking down over a huddle of dark thatched roofs under the stars, every one of them a household he knows by name, every hearth banked for the night, the smoke gone thin and blue, the church tower black against the sky at his back, with its one good bell hung silent in the dark, and the whole valley of them held in his keeping and in his prayers, all of them asleep, and him awake and watching over them the way you watch over a thing you love and cannot keep safe forever, and mean to keep safe, as long as you are able. Hold that picture. He does not know it, but he is looking at the village as full as it will ever be. Then the summer came. I told you I would not dwell on it, and I will keep my word. It came up over the wold the way weather comes, without asking, and it went through the close-packed little houses the way a thing goes through close-packed things, quickly, and it did not care whose house it was, the Lord's stewards or the poorest widows at the nether end, and by the time anyone understood what was among them, it was already everywhere. And there was nothing to be done but the one thing Father Edmund knew how to do, which was to keep faith with them, one at a time, in the only way a priest can. So he did that. Day after day and week after week through that hot, bad summer he went to them, house by house, the ones who could still send for him and then the ones who could not. And he sat with them, and he did the offices, and he said the words that are said, and then when it was over for that one he went out, and he saw them decently into the ground. And then he went to the next house. And he did it again. Say it slowly, because it is the whole of what he did, and it is more than most men could do. He buried them. He buried his people again and again and again, through the long light evenings of that summer, until the churchyard he had kept so trim was turned and turned again. And there were more graves than there had been in all his years before, and still they came. And every time, this is the thing, this is what I brought you here for, every time one of them went into the ground, he tolled the bell. He climbed, or sent the clerk to climb, the dark stair of the tower, and he laid a hand to the rope, and he rang the great good bell out over the wold, once and slow, and then again the passing bell. The bell that says to everyone within the sound of it that a soul has gone from among you, and you may stop your work a moment, and remember them, and pray. That is what the bell was for. That is what a passing bell is. It is the village's own voice, lifted up to say we have lost one of ours, and to say it out loud, and to say it on purpose, so that no one goes out of the world from that place unmarked and unmourned and unheard. He told it for the first of them the way he had told it all his life, gravely and fully, giving each one their due of sound. But as the summer went on and the graves multiplied, there came a thing that I think must have been harder for a man like Father Edmund than the burying itself, and it is this. There came to be almost too many to toll for. There came days when the bell scarcely stopped, when the last stroke for one soul had not died away over the fields before he must lay his hand to the rope again for the next. And there came a point, you can feel the man reaching it, where a slower priest might have said, I cannot keep ringing, there is no end to it. Let me ring once at evening for all the days dead together, and be done. And I do not know for certain that he did not, in the very worst of it, do exactly that, because a man can only do what a man can do, and no shame to him. But I will tell you what the rolls say. And the rolls say that he kept ringing. As long as he could stand and lift his arm, the accounts suggest, that bell was rung for them, one by one, each soul given its own strokes over the grass, because he had decided, you can see him deciding it, at the cold window over the guttering rush, that of all the things this summer would take from his village, and it would take nearly everything, it would not take from any single one of them the small last dignity of being rung home by name. And so through that whole terrible summer the wold was never long silent. If you had stood as I once stood, up on that high ground on a still evening. But no, you were not there, and I am getting ahead of myself, and I will bring you and me both up onto that ground properly before the night is done. If you had stood there that summer, you would have heard, over the emptying valley, again and again and again, slow and grave and unwearied, the one good bell of Wold Osmond saying the one thing a passing bell says, over and over, a soul, and a soul, and a soul, until you would have thought the sound itself was the village grieving for its own body out loud. Now, come close, because here is the seed of the whole night, and I am going to plant it, and then, in the old way, I am going to walk away and leave it in the ground for a while, and not dig it up again for you until much later, when you are far more asleep than you are now, because a thing worth 600 years of waiting is worth your waiting a little too. Somewhere in that summer, or in the tired years just after it, when the counting was done and the graves had greened over, Father Edmund did a small strange thing, a thing that a lesser record-keeper would never have thought to do, and that a busier man would never have found the time for. In among the plain entries of the parish accounts, the pence for candle wax and the pence for the mending of the church roof and the rents owed and the rents forgiven, he wrote down a line that was not an account of anything, a line that had no business in that book of pennies at all, an instruction, meant not for anyone living then, but for someone he would never meet, someone who would come a long, long time after him, whoever should be keeping the bell of Wold Osmond at the very end. I will tell you in a little while exactly what that line said, when the time is right for it. But not yet. I told you I would leave it in the ground, and I will only tell you now the shape of it, so that you can carry it. Warm, the way you are carrying the bell and the widow and the humps in the grass. The line was about the bell. It was, near enough, an instruction that when at last the village was empty and gone, and think of what it took for a man in a still living village, a village he had spent his life keeping, to sit down and write a sentence that began by supposing his whole village gone, that when that day came, whenever it came, however many lifetimes off, the bell should be rung once for the passing of the place itself, the way he had rung it for the passing of each soul, and that it should then be kept, and never sold, and never melted, and never let go, for, and here is the phrase I want to leave ringing in you, for a place should not let its own passing go unmarked. Sit with that a moment before you drift any further. He had spent a whole summer making sure that not one soul went unrung, unmarked, unmourned. And having done that for the people, he thought, because he was the kind of man who thinks a place is a kind of person too, and he was not wrong, he thought the place itself deserved the same. He could not know when the last of them would go. He could not know it would be 300 years and more. He only knew that a village that had wrung every one of its dead home should not, at the last, be allowed to die in silence and unnoticed, like a fire going out in an empty room with no one to say it had ever been lit, and so he left the instruction, and left the bell, and trusted. This broad, slow, kind old man trusted that somewhere down the long, dark corridor of the years there would be someone who loved the place enough to read his line and keep his word. Hold that. Keep it. I will come back to it. Now let me tell you the quieter and colder thing, the thing that is really the engine of this whole night. The reason a village half empty did not fill up again, as villages have always filled up again after their bad summers. Because that is the natural thing, you understand. A plague is terrible, but a plague passes. And in the ordinary course, a village licks its wounds and buries its dead, and in a generation, the cradles are full again, and the empty houses have new families in them, and the wheel turns on. That is what should have happened to Wold Osmond. It did not. And the reason it did not is not a dramatic reason. There is no villain in it, or no villain you can hate cleanly, which is worse. The reason is arithmetic, and it is the saddest kind, the kind done quietly by reasonable men in good light with clean hands. Here it is, as gently as I can lay it. When the summer had done its work, there were half as many people on the wold, and near as much land as before, and that changes everything, though it takes years for the change to show its full face. When people are many and land is scarce, a lord wants his land ploughed, because ploughland full of families paying rent and owing labour is where his wealth is, and so he keeps his people and courts his people and needs his people. But when the people are suddenly few, and the land lies half idle, and there are not hands enough to work the strips as they were worked before, then a hard, cold question begins to be asked, first quietly, and then more openly. In the manner, and then in the manners that came after when the old family sold up, the question of what this high, thin upland ground is really best at. And the answer, on a high wold like that, with its short, sweet grass, was not corn. The answer was sheep. Wool was the great wealth of England in those centuries, and one shepherd with a dog and a flock could hold and profit a stretch of ground that had taken a dozen families their whole laborious lives to plough. And he could do it up here on the thin high ground where corn was always a struggle, and the wool went off down the old roads to the towns and the ports and the looms of Flanders, and came back as money, clean money, money that did not depend on there being enough young men to follow enough ploughs through enough short wet springs. Do you see it? Do you see how reasonable it was, and how terrible? It was more profitable to run sheep than to keep men. And so, over the long years after that summer, not all at once, never all at once, always one field and one household and one winter at a time, the lord, and then the landlords who came after, began to do the reasonable thing. When a family died out or gave up and left, their strips were not given to another family. They were thrown together with the strips beside them into a larger close, and grassed and turned over to the flock. When a house fell empty and its roof began to go, it was not mended for the next tenant. It was let fall, and by its good timbers and its stones were carried off, and the ground it had stood on was grassed too. Little by little the common was enclosed, hedged and banked and taken in, so that the poor who had grazed a cow or a few geese on it had that taken from under them as well, and one more reason to stay was quietly withdrawn. And so the old bitter saying grew up, in that century and the ones after it, wherever this was happening, and it was happening all over England, Wold Osmond was only one small place among a great many. The saying that the sheep ate the men. It is a hard little phrase, and I want you to carry it, because it will come back. It is one of the motifs I mean to re-ring for you all night, the way I mean to re-ring the bell. The sheep ate the men, not by violence, by arithmetic. The sheep did not drive the people off the wold, they simply, gently made the people unnecessary, and there is no gentler and no crueler thing you can do to a people than to make them unnecessary to the ground they live on, because a village is held to its place by work, by there being a reason to get up in the cold and go out, and when the work goes, the reason goes, and when the reason goes, then the leaving begins, slow at first, a household here and a household there, the young ones first, the ones with least holding them, off over the wold to the towns that still had need of hands, and then more, and then more. And this, settle into this, because it is the true and quiet heart of the whole story, and it is the thing I would have you take away with you into sleep. This is why the reason for a place can go long, long before the place itself does. It is a thing worth knowing. The wealth goes first, and no one much notices, because the houses are still standing, and the smoke still rises, and the bell still rings on a Sunday, and it all looks as it always looked. Then the work goes, quietly, a mill stopped, a smithy cold, a plough sold, and still it looks nearly the same, and the people who love the place tell themselves it is only a lean spell, and better years will come. And then, last of all, and only after the wealth and the work are long gone, the people themselves begin to go, one household at a time, over years and years, each one telling itself that it is only they who are leaving, that the place will go on without them, that someone will always keep it, until one still evening, without any single day you could point to as the day it happened. There are more empty houses than full ones, and the green is grassing over, and the plough ridges are softening under the turf, and the great bell that Father Edmund tolled for every single soul is ringing for fewer and fewer of them, and a village that once believed with its whole heart that it would last forever is, without ever quite admitting it, beginning the long, slow, patient work of becoming grass. But that long, slow work, the 300 years of it, the leaving one door and one field at a time, and the poor faithful woman who would not go, that is where I mean to take you next, slowly, with all the time in the world, and there is no hurry to it at all. For now it is enough to know that the break came in one summer, and that a good, broad, kind old priest rang every soul of them home, and left a line in a book for the far-off day when the place itself would need ringing home too. And it is enough, before we go down into the long dying, to rest a moment here with him at his cold window, breath white in the poor light, looking out over the roofs of a village that was already, though it did not yet know it, beginning to be swallowed, not by any sea. Up here on the high dry wold there was never any sea, but by the short sweet grass, and the patient sheep, and the slow reasonable arithmetic of the years, and to know that the sound that hung over it all, then and for centuries after in the memory of it, was the sound of one bell, ringing, and asking, without words, only to be remembered. And so we come to the long part, the slow part, the 300 years that no chronicle troubles to keep, because nothing happened in them worth a chronicler's ink, which is to say that everything happened in them, only slowly, only quietly. Only the way that a candle goes out is a thing that happens, though no one can name the instant of it, and I will not tell you these years as a row of dates, because the dates would not keep you company, and they would not keep you awake, and worse, they would carry you past the very thing we are here for, which is not the arithmetic of a dying, but the small warm human middle of it, the people in it. So let the lamp burn low now and settle a little deeper, and I will walk you down these years the way they were truly lived, which was one household at a time, one door at a time, one field at a time thrown over the hedge into the sheep run, one winter at a time when a family that had been on the wold since before the roll was written decided, over the low fire, in the tired voice people use for the hardest plain things, that they could not stay another year, and went. Picture how it goes, because it goes the same each time, and the sameness is part of the sorrow of it, and part of the mercy too. A family that has held a strip, and a house, and a name in the parish for longer than anyone can count finds one spring that there is no longer bread enough in the year to carry them from harvest to harvest, because the Lord has taken back the strips that fell empty when the last of the plague dead were buried, and has thrown them together and put sheep on them. And where a man could once feed a family off his own labour on his own furrows there is now grass, and a shepherd, and 1,000 soft greybacks moving over ground that used to grow wheat, and there is simply no work and no living for a plain man there any more. And so, on a morning that is like any other morning, the family loads what it owns onto a cart or onto its own backs. And this is the part I want you to hold, because it is very tender and very small. They take the door. They take the door off its hinges and lay it on the cart. A poor house on the wold owned little that was truly worth the carrying, but a good oak door was a made thing, a shaped thing, worth money and worth memory both. And a family leaving would lift the door of the house their grandfather hung, and carry it away over the hill to whatever new lintel it might one day fit. So that behind them, in the house that had held 4 generations, there was left a doorway open to the weather, an empty black square in a grey wall, a house with its mouth open, and that open mouth was the true beginning of the end of every house on that wold. Because a house whose door is gone lets in the rain, and the rain gets into the thatch, and the thatch rots and falls in, and the wet gets into the wall clay and into the roof timbers, and the frost gets into the wet and cracks the stone, and within a few short winters the house that stood for 200 years is a low tumble of stone and a scatter of rotten wood. And then a neighbour who has not yet left comes by, and takes the good timbers for his own roof or his own fire, robs the fallen house of anything a house can still give, and after that there is only a heap. And after a few more winters the grass has climbed the heap and rounded it and greened it. And there, do you see, there is your first hump in the grass, your first green mound in the pasture. Made not in an hour and not in a storm, but slowly, patiently, out of one family's leaving and one door lifted from its hinges on an ordinary spring morning. Say it slowly to yourself. A village does not fall all at once. It is unroofed one house at a time, and each house takes years to go down, and the grass is never in a hurry. The grass has nothing but time, and this is the whole quiet engine of it. This is how a place of hundreds of souls becomes a field of humps, not by any single blow, but by the endless soft subtraction of ordinary people doing the only sensible thing, which was to go where the work was. Because you cannot eat loyalty, and you cannot feed your children on the graves of their grandparents, and no one at all, should be blamed for going. Hold on to that, because we will come in a moment to the one who did not go, and I do not want you to think her staying was wisdom and their going was weakness. For it was not that. It was never that. The ones who left were brave in their way, and the one who stayed was brave in hers. And the difference between them is only the difference between two kinds of love. The love that carries the door away to build a life for the living children, and the love that will not leave the churchyard where the dead children lie. And both are love, and I will not choose between them, and neither, I think, will you, once you have met her. So let the years pass over the wold the way I have shown you, household by household, and let me tell you what the leaving sounded like from inside the village, because the people who lived through it did not measure it in acres and they did not measure it in the Lord's rent rolls. They measured it in sounds going quiet, one after another. The way you in your own life have measured the emptying of a house not by the furniture carried out, but by the rooms going silent. First, and this was early, and it grieved them more than they could say, the mill stopped. A village mill is a living thing, a great patient breathing thing, the wheel turning in the beck and the stones grinding, and the whole building shivering with the work of it, and the white dust hanging in the shafts of light, and the miller's voice, and the queue of folk with their sacks and their gossip on the day the mill ran. And when there are no longer enough hands to plough enough strips to grow enough corn to be worth the grinding, the mill stops, and the wheel is still, and the beck runs on under a wheel that does not turn, and the villagers who are left walk past it, and hear the water, and no stones, only the water, and they know, though none of them will say it, that a village whose mill has stopped is a village that has begun to die, because the mill was the belly of the place, and the belly has gone quiet. Then, and this too was a going quiet they felt in their teeth, the smithy went cold. There is no sound in a working village more constant or more comforting than the ring of the smith's hammer on the anvil, that bright, hard, patient music that means iron is being shaped, and horses shod and ploughs mended, and the ordinary work of the world is going forward, and a child grows up on the wold with that ringing in the background of every day, the way you grew up with some sound you never noticed until it stopped, and then one year the smith, who has no work because there are no ploughs left to mend and no teams left to shoe, damps his fire for the last time and goes, and the anvil stands cold in the cold forge, and the silence where the hammer was is a silence the whole village hears, a hole in the day where a sound used to be. And I want you to feel how that is worse in its way than any loud disaster, because a disaster you can grieve and be done, but a sound that simply is not there any more is a grief that renews itself every single morning, when you wake and wait for it out of habit and it does not come. And then, one after another, the rest of the sounds went out like the notes of a tune played slower and slower until it stops. The last plough team was sold, 6 great patient beasts leaning into the yoke, the creak of the harness and the turned earth shining, and the ploughman's call to the oxen. All of it loaded and led away over the hill to a farm that still had furrows to turn. And the villagers stood at their doors and watched the team go, and knew that no one now would break the ground here again for corn, that the strips their fathers had ploughed since the world was young were grass from that day forward, and grass forever, and the school, which was never much, only the old clerk or the curate teaching a handful of the village children their letters and their catechism in the church porch or in a cold back room, the school shut. Because there were no longer children enough to gather, 3 families with young ones having gone in as many years, and a village where no child is taught its letters is a village that has stopped believing in its own tomorrow, and the alehouse went dark, and this one they mourned almost with laughter. Because the alehouse was where the men had sat of an evening and grumbled and sung and put the world to rights over the thin sour beer, and when the alehouse keeper hung up his ladle and left, there was nowhere left for the last few men to sit together of an evening, and so they sat alone, each by his own small fire, and the village that had laughed together in the warm dark now was quiet in the dark, house by scattered house, a light here and a light there, and long cold black between. And through all of it, over all of it, growing louder as the human sounds grew fainter, there was the one sound that filled the place where all the others had been, and it was the sound of sheep. Sit with that a moment, because it is the strangest and the truest sound of this whole long chapter of the story. Where there had been the mill and the hammer and the plough team and the children and the alehouse and the market crowd, there was now, over all the wold, from horizon to horizon, the soft ceaseless business of sheep, the tearing of grass, the small complaint of the ewes, the answering of the lambs, the dull knock of the bells the shepherds hung on the leaders, the whole slow grey tide of them moving across the humps and hollows of the fallen houses, cropping the grass on the very hearths where families had warmed their hands, drifting up the green lanes that had been streets, standing in the roofless church porch out of the wind, and if you had stood on the high wold in those late years and shut your eyes, you would have heard, instead of a village, a flock. And this is the exact and terrible meaning of the old bitter, saying that the people of that time passed from mouth to mouth, sheep may safely graze. The sheep ate the men. And I told you in the last of our nights that it would come back, and here it is come back. Only now you can hear it. Now it is not an economic fact in a book, but a sound on a hilltop. The sound of grass being eaten where men used to be. And I will not preach on it. This is a channel for sleeping and not for sermons. But I will ask you only to hold the plain sad picture of it and let it be. The greybacks moving over the green graves of the houses. The one sound that stayed after all the others had gone. And now, into this thinning, quieting, greening place, with the sheep flowing over the hollows and the black doorways open to the weather, and one house and then another going down into the grass. Let me at last bring you to her, to the one who would not go, and let me set her before you gently, and keep her before you a long while, because she is the warm still heart of this whole cold slow chapter, and she is the reason I have kept you awake to hear it. There was, in the last handful of households, at the low end of the village, the end they called the nether end, where the lane ran down toward the beck and the last few houses stood, an old woman, a widow, and I will call her, as my grandmother called her when she told it by the fire with the doors left open, the good wife of the nether end, and I will tell you first the plain hard shape of her life, and then I will tell you the tender secret at the middle of it. She was poor. Poor even for that poor place. Poor in the way that has no drama in it. Only the endless small arithmetic of not quite enough. Not enough fuel, not enough bread, not enough wool. The cloak turned and turned again, until there was more mending than cloth in it. The same thin soup made thinner, the fire kept low and banked and coaxed, and never let to blaze, because a blaze is fuel spent that cannot be got back. Her husband was dead these many years and lay in the churchyard up the lane, and her children, and here is the weight of her. Here is the stone she carried. Her children lay there too. Some of them. The ones the fevers and the hard winters had taken small. 3 little ones under the grass by their father, and the grown ones who had lived were gone away over the wold into the world to find their bread, as grown children rightly do, and had begged her, I have no doubt, on their visits that grew rarer as the years and the distance told, to come away with them, to leave the dying place and live out her days warm in a town with grandchildren about her feet. And she would not. she would not go. And you must understand that she could have gone easily, that this was not a woman trapped. For in those years, when a landlord wanted the last souls off a piece of ground so that he might throw it wholly to sheep, he would as often as not offer them a good house elsewhere for the taking, a sound-roofed cottage on some other holding, rent forgiven, just to be rid of them off the pasture he wanted empty, and such a house was hers for the asking, a better house than she had ever lived in, warm and whole and far from the sad emptying wold, and she said no. Picture her saying it. Picture the steward or the bailiff come down the green lane on his good horse to the low door of the last house at the nether end, hat in hand, not unkind, offering her the warm dry cottage over the hill, and picture the old woman in the doorway with her worn hands folded in her apron, thanking him. For she was never anything but civil, and telling him in the fewest words that she was obliged to him, but she would bide. She would bide. And when he pressed her, as such men do, being reasonable men and thinking her a foolish old woman who did not understand her own interest, she told him the whole of her reason in one plain sentence that my grandmother gave exactly as it had come down, that she could not go away and leave her people lying up the lane with no one to bide near them, that she had buried a husband and 3 children in that ground, and she would not turn her back on them and go off to be warm among strangers, that everything she had ever loved in the world was in that churchyard or under that grass, and she would keep faith with it, and she would stay by them until her own turn came to lie down among them, and then, she said, and only then, the steward might have his pasture and welcome. And the steward went away and left her, because there was nothing to be done with such an answer, and she stayed, the last soul but a very few in a village going down into the grass, an old poor woman keeping faith with her dead in the ruins of the place they had all been born in. Now let me dwell on her staying, on the texture of it, on the days of it, because this is where I want to keep you a good long while in the warm, and because the whole meaning of her is not in the grand refusal, but in the 10,000 small ordinary mornings that the refusal cost her. Morning after morning, choosing to stay again by simply waking up and not leaving. Think of the fuel. A single old woman in a cold high house on an exposed wold must have fire or die, and fire is fuel, and fuel must be got, and there was no one now to get it for her. So picture her out in the cold gathering seasons, going along the fallen hedges and the ruined houses for anything that would burn, the robbed and rotten timbers of the tumbled cottages, the broken firs, the dried dung of the sheep that now owned the wold, the turves cut from the green humps that had been her neighbours' walls, an old woman with a bent back and a bundle of sticks going home in the failing light past the black doorways, and stacking her little store against the coming winter, and knowing, with the plain knowledge of the very poor, exactly how many days of fire she had, and exactly how few. Think of her hands. Think of the hands of a woman who has done every hard thing with her hands for 70 years and has no one now to do the least thing for her. The hands that had ground and kneaded and spun and mended and dug and washed and laid out her own dead, and now, worn to the bone and the knuckle, still went on doing, still carried the water up from the beck, still turned the same coat, still darned the same stocking by the low light, because there was no wool to make a new one, and would never be again. Think of the mending, hour on hour of it, an old woman by a small fire in a great silence with her needle, not because the mending was urgent, but because the hands must have something, and the long evenings must be crossed somehow, and the small firelit work of the needle was a way of being still alive and still keeping on in a place where nothing else was going forward at all. And think above all of the silence she sat in, and of the one sound that filled it, for at night in her low house at the nether end, with the last few lights of the last few neighbours far and few across the dark, and the great black wold all around, and the church a-shape against the last of the sky up the lane, the sound she lived inside was the sound of the sheep. The shifting and the cropping and the small night noises of the flock lying out on the hills where the streets had been. The sound of the very thing that had emptied her village going on all night long over the graves of it. And she lay and listened to it, and did not hate it, my grandmother said, because it was God's creatures and not their fault, but heard in it, every single night, the plain fact of what had come to her home. And now, the light. Now I will tell you about the light, which is the thing I most want you to carry away from her, the thing to hold on to through all the rest of our nights, because it will come back at the very end, it will be handed to you at the end, and you will be asked to keep it. So let me set it in your hands now while you are warm. Every night, every single night without fail, the good wife of the nether end kept a light burning in her window. Not the banked low fire on the hearth which she kept for her own poor warmth, but a light set in the window itself, in the small deep window that looked up the lane and out over the dark wold. A rushlight, most likely a little pithwick, soaked in fat. Or in a better week, a stub of a candle, a small mean flame that cost her what she could least spare. The fat she might have eaten, the fuel she might have burned for warmth, spent instead on a light in a window in an all but empty village where there was scarcely a soul left to see it, and she set it there every night and let it burn, and tended it, and would not let the dark have that one window. And when the last neighbours or the passing shepherd or rarely some traveller lost on the wold asked her why she troubled, why an old poor woman would waste good light in the window of the last house of a dead village, she gave them always the same plain sensible answer, that it was to light a benighted shepherd home over the dark hills, or to bring a lost traveller in off the wold to a door where there was still a fire, a kindness, a practical charity, a thing any good soul might do, and that was true. And they nodded and thought her a good old woman, and it was true. But it was not the whole of the truth, and the whole of the truth she told to no one, or told only perhaps to the dark and to her dead, and my grandmother, who had it from her grandmother, gave it as the deepest thing in the whole story of the woman who stayed, that the light in the window was not truly for the shepherd or the traveller at all, or not only for them, but was a light kept burning, so that the village should not go wholly dark. Sit with that. Let it settle all the way down, in a place that was dying by inches, in a village that was going out house by house and light by light like a great constellation, setting one star at a time. This one old woman had appointed herself, without a word to anyone, the keeper of the last flame, and had decided in her own silent heart that as long as she drew breath there would be one lit window on that wold at night. One small stubborn point of warm light in the great dark where a town had been, so that the village should not, on her watch, go entirely out, so that anyone looking across the black wold from a far hill would see that yes, there is still a light there, there is still someone there, the place is not yet wholly dead, and that when at last her light did go dark, as one night it must, then the village might be truly said to have ended, but not before, not while she lived, not while her worn hands could trim a wick, and I ask you to feel the courage and the folly and the almost unbearable tenderness of that. An old woman burning her own scant fat and fuel every night to keep a dying village company in the dark, to keep faith with a place that was leaving her, to stand her small watch of light over the graves of everyone she had ever loved, and I will say it plainly for once. Because it is a channel for peace and not for pretending, this is one of the bravest things a human soul can do, to keep a light burning for something that cannot be saved, to tend a flame not because it will change the ending, but because a thing loved deserves to be sat up with, to the end and not left to die alone in the dark, and if you have ever done it, sat up with a dying garden, a dying town, a dying trade, a dying person, a dying anything, kept your own small light in your own window when all sense said go, then this old woman is your kinswoman across 600 years, and this story I told you at the first is partly yours. So let her light burn there in your mind for a while, the one lit window on the dark wold, while I bring her, gently, gently to the end of her staying, and let me tell you how she went, and how I choose to tell it. The truth is that no one truly knows how the good wife of the nether end came to her end, because there was almost no one left to know, and the parish that would have written it down was all but gone, and what came down was only a handful of tellings, some of them hard and some of them kind. The way the endings of the very poor and the very alone are always half a mystery and half a thing the tellers shape to their own hearts, and I have thought about this a long while, about which ending to give you, and I have decided. Because this is a story for peace and for sleeping, and because I loved her before I ever met you and mean you to love her too, that I will choose the kinder version, and I will tell you why I am allowed to in a moment. But first let me give it to you. I will tell you that she died as I believe such a faithful soul deserved to die, and I think truly did, which is quietly, and in her own house at the last house of the nether end, on a still night, an old woman worn all the way out at the end of a long faithful watch, lying down at last in her own bed by her own low fire with, I am sure of it, the light still burning in the window as it had burned every night for all those years, going out of the world gently in the small hours the way a tired, good soul does, with her work all done and her faith all kept, having stayed to the very end by the ones she loved, so that when her turn came, as she had told the steward it one day would, she went up the lane a last short way and lay down among her husband and her children in the churchyard grass, and there was, I like to believe, someone left, a neighbour from the 2 or 3 houses that yet had souls, a passing curate, some good body, to say the words over her and cover her gently and mark the place, so that she was not wholly unattended even at the last, and that on the first night after she was buried, for the first night in longer than anyone could remember, there was no light in the window of the last house at the nether end, and the wold was wholly dark from edge to edge, and the village, on that dark night, having lost its last kept flame, may truly be said to have ended, quietly, without a bell, an old woman's light gone out, and the dark come all the way in at last. And I know, that there are harder tellings, that a woman so old and so alone at the end of everything may have gone in colder or lonelier ways than that, and I am not blind to them, and I do not pretend the world is always kind to those who deserve its kindness most. But I will tell you the rule I keep, the rule my grandmother kept, for a story told by lamplight to someone drifting towards sleep, and it is this: where the truth is not known and cannot be known, and where 2 tellings both fit the little that is certain, you are allowed, you are even, I think, obliged, to choose the one that lets the good rest easy, because the kinder telling harms no one. The woman is 600 years gone and past, all hurt, and the only thing your choice can change is the weight you yourself carry away into the dark. And so I choose to believe, and I ask you to choose to believe with me, that the good wife of the nether end died warm and quiet and unafraid, her light burning, her faith kept, her long watch honourably ended, gathered in among her own at the last. And if you would like to keep faith with her tonight, the way she kept faith with her dead, then hold that lit window in your mind as you drift, the one small flame, on the great dark wold, and know that the light did not, in the end, go out for nothing, because I am telling you of it now, 6 centuries on, in a strange new land she could never have dreamed of, and you are hearing it, and a light that someone still speaks of is a light that has not truly gone dark at all, but of who came, long after, to know her and to set her light down where it could not be lost, and of the grave bookish man who fell in love with the whole vanished village and gave his life to keeping it. I will tell you when we have rested a little, for that is the next turning of our story, and it is time now to let the fire sink and the dark come gently on. And so it went, the way a fire goes when no one gets up to feed it. Not all at once, not with any single moment you could point to and say, there, that was the end, but by a long and gentle failing, a settling of the coals, until one night there is warmth still in the grey of it, and by morning there is only cold ash and the shape of what burned, and this is how a village ends too. Not with a last trumpet, but with a last of small things, a last of ordinary things done for the last time, by people who did not know, most of them, that it was the last time. Because that is the mercy the years keep for us, that they do not tell us which morning is the final morning of anything, and so the woman of the nether end, whom we have kept company with these long, slow hours, was not the last. There were a few after her, a handful, a scattering of households clinging to the emptying green the way the last leaves cling to a bare hedge in December, brown and curled and holding on past all reason, and I want you to watch them go, gently, the way you would watch a boat pull out from a shore, not with alarm, but with that soft ache that is almost a kind of peace, because there was a last wedding in the old grey church, and I would have you picture it. A young man and a young woman of two of the remaining families, standing up before a curate who had ridden over from the living parish 3 valleys off, because there was no priest of their own any longer, the church too poor and too empty to keep one, and the few neighbours that were left crowding into the great cold nave that had once held 300 souls on a feast day, and now held 11, their voices small under the high roof. The words of the old service going up into a space built for a congregation that was in the ground all around them, in the green churchyard that by now held more of the parish than the parish held above it, so that the living were the minority and the dead the great multitude, and the 2 young people said their vows and were joined and went out under the porch into the light, and someone had gathered what late flowers the wold would give, and it was a good day, a real wedding with real gladness in it. And I want you to hold on to that gladness, because a village dying is not a village without joy in it. That is the thing we get wrong when we picture these endings. We picture only the sorrow, and we forget that people go on being people to the very last. They marry and are glad and eat and quarrel and forgive and lay a baby in a cradle, and there was a last of that too, a last christening, the very last child ever carried to that font. The same font, mark it, that will come back into this story out of the dark ground. So hold it, hold the font, the last child of the parish held over the old stone bowl and the water poured and the name given and the small cross made on the small forehead. And that child grew up and went away over the wold like all the rest, carrying in it, though it never knew. The last thread of a line 6 centuries long, and that is how a line ends, not cut but simply carried off somewhere else and let run into other lines until you cannot find it any more. Which is not death exactly, it is only distance, and there is comfort in that if you look for it. And then there came the last service of all, and this I will slow down for, because it deserves slowing down, and because you are drifting now, and I mean you to drift, and there is nothing in what I am about to tell you that should catch at you or keep you up. It is a quiet ending, the quietest. For one Sunday, a Sunday nobody had marked in advance as different from the Sundays before it, the curate rode over as he had been doing less and less often, once a month and then once a quarter, because it was a long cold way for a congregation that could be counted on one hand, and he read the service through to the few that had gathered, the very last few, old for the most part, the young having gone where the work was, and when it was done he did what he had done 100 times, he gathered his book and his things, and he went out and he locked the door, and he rode away. And not one of them, not the curate and not the old souls stamping the cold out of their feet in the porch, knew that the door had just been locked for the last time and would not be opened again for worship while the world stood. Because that is how the last time comes, without a bell rung for it, without anyone saying now this. Is the end just a door pulled to and a key turned, and a horse's hooves going off small over the hill, and the church stood empty behind them in the failing light, and it was, from that hour, no longer a church that a village kept, but only a building that the years now owned. And here is where I would have you rest a while, in the long strange afterlife of that building, because a church does not fall the way a house falls, quickly robbed of its timbers in a season and gone in a generation. A church is built to outlast its people, that is the whole idea of it. Stone raised up to stand, when the hands that raised it are dust, and so it stood. And it went on standing, alone now in a field where a village had been, its churchyard wall keeping its square of the dead, its tower still holding up the grey sky, and for a long while it must have looked, to a shepherd passing, almost as if it were only sleeping and might wake, as if the village were only away and would come back, but the village did not come back. And slowly the church learned that it was alone, the first winters, took the small things. The glass out of the windows where the lead had gone soft and no glazier came, so that the wind walked in and out of the nave as it pleased, and the weather began its patient housekeeping, the rain teaching the roof where it was weak, the frost getting into every crack and prying, gently, gently, the way frost does. A hair's width a year, and the roof, which had been kept and mended for 400 years by a parish that loved it, now went unkept, and a slate slid, and then another, and the water got in where the slates had been, and found the great beams, and settled to the slow work of rot, and 1 year you would not have heard it if you had been there. Or you would have heard only a soft crash in the night and thought it thunder. 1 year a stretch of the roof let go and came down into the nave in a ruin of timber and slate, and the sky was in the church now, the open sky where the painted roof had been, and after that it went quicker. Because a church with its roof gone is a church that is only waiting, and the rain came straight in now onto the paved floor, and stood in the hollows the feet of the dead parish had worn. And grass, mark this, grass came, the first blades of it pushing up between the flagstones inside the church, inside, where 1,000 Sundays of shod feet had kept the stone bare. The grass came in the moment the feet stopped, patient, unhurried, certain, the same grass that was even then swallowing the streets outside now crossing the threshold, and beginning, softly, to swallow the house of God as well, because grass does not know a church from a cow byre. Grass knows only that here is bare ground, and here it may grow. And it grew, and then there came the robbers of stone, and I will not have you hate them. Because they were not wicked men, they were poor men and practical men, farmers wanting to build a barn or mend a wall or raise a new house down in the valley where the living was, and here stood a great heap of dressed stone, good worked stone, squared and true, that no one owned any more and no one would miss, standing useless in a field, and so they came with carts, over years, over generations, and they took it, a load at a time, the way you would take windfalls from under a tree that no one tended. And the church came down not by falling, but by being carried away, quarried, undone, its stones going into the barns and byres and cottage walls of the whole country round about, so that if you know how to look, even now you can find that church scattered for 10 miles in every direction, a mullion here holding up a pig-steer carved stone there set the wrong way up in a garden wall. A font step become a door-sill, the church not gone but only distributed, given away the way the last child of the parish was given away into other bloodlines, and I find I cannot be angry at the men who took it, because at least the stone went on being used, went on keeping rain off cattle and warmth in kitchens, which is more than can be said for most of what we build, and better, surely, than lying in a useless heap. But it meant the end of the church as a church, and the tower was the last to go, because a tower is the hardest thing to pull down, and the least useful once it is down. So the tower stood after the nave was gone, stood a strange, lonely finger of grey stone in the middle of a sheep pasture, a landmark for thee. Shepherds, a thing the children of the valley were told was haunted and dared each other to climb to. And it too, in its turn, in its own slow time, came down, some of it pulled for the stone, and some of it simply falling. A corner sloughing off in a great gale, a wall bellying and then bursting, until there was no tower either, until there was nothing left standing above the grass at all. And that, you understand, was the true ending, not the last service, not the locked door, but this, the day the last stone stood up out of the turf and then did not. The day the wold closed over the place entirely, and there was, for the first time since the first Saxon broke the first furrow up here, nothing on that hilltop but grass and sheep and the wind. And the humps. The low green humps and hollows where it all had been, the streets gone to swells in the turf, the houses gone to platforms, the churchyard gone to a slightly greener square, the ploughlands gone to that long low ridge and furrow corduroy that you can still read in a low sun. The whole of it there, and none of it there, present and vanished at once, a town written in earthworks in a language that, for a long while, no one living could read, and now that the place is gone, now that the last stone is down and the grass has won and there is nothing left to save, Now is exactly when this story finds the man it has been waiting for all along, and I want you to settle deeper, because we come now to the keeper, to the one who loved it. And his is the thread that ties this whole vanished parish to you and me and the fire we are sitting by, so let the lamp burn low and hold on to him, for we will not let him go until the very end. Picture him first as a young man, and a disappointed one. For that is how he came to it, the Reverend Theophilus Bray. A grave and bookish young clergyman, with more learning in him than luck, who had hoped, as young men do, for a good living in a busy place, a fat parish in a market town with a full church and a full life and preferment perhaps, one day if he served well and was noticed, and who was given instead, whether by ill fortune or, as he half suspected all his life, by some slight, some quiet judgment that he was not quite the man for anything better. This, a near empty upland parish on the high wold, a handful of scattered farms, 40 or 50 souls all told strung out across miles of sheep country, and, in the middle of it, on a hilltop, nothing. An empty field with some bumps in it and a scatter of old graves, and the ghost of a church. A parish that had once, the record said, held hundreds, and now held almost no one, so that he came up over the wold that first day, with his boxes of books behind him, and his heart, I do not doubt, low in his chest. And he looked at what he had been given, this quiet, this emptiness, this great green nothing where a town had been, and he said, in a line he wrote in his journal that first week, a line that came down to us with the rest of him, that he had been, as it seemed to him, sent to bury a place, not to serve one. Sent to bury a place, not to serve one. Sit with that, because it is the truest and the bitterest thing a man in his position could say, that there was here no congregation to speak of, no work of a parson's usual kind, no christenings to speak of, and few weddings, and only, now and then, a funeral. The slow subtraction of the last few farm families, so that his whole office, it seemed, was to preside over the tail end of a dying, to be chaplain to a graveyard, to keep the forms going over a place that had already, in every way that mattered, gone. And he was, that first year and more, a disappointed and a lonely man, and I will not pretend otherwise, because the sweetness of what came after is only sweet because of the sourness it grew out of, the way the best fruit comes off the hardest ground. But here is where the slow thing happened to him, the thing this whole story turns on. And it happened, as these things do, without his deciding it, without his noticing it at first. He began to walk the field, in the evenings, having nothing else to do with his evenings, a bookish man in an empty country. He took to walking out among the humps in the grass at the day's end, and at first he walked over them the way anyone walks over them, as bumps, as the accidents of an old field. But a man of his cast of mind cannot walk over a pattern for long without beginning to see that it is a pattern. And there came an evening, he does not date it, but you can feel it in the journal, the change of weather in him. There came an evening when he stood among the humps in a low gold light, the kind of light that lies along the ground and makes every hollow a pool of blue shadow and every swell a ridge of fire, the very light that reads the earthworks best, as any man who has walked a lost village at dusk will tell you. And he saw suddenly, all at once, that he was not standing in a lumpy field, that he was standing in a street, that this long straight hollow at his feet was a lane, that these squared platforms to either side were houses, house after house after house, that this greener rectangle was a churchyard, and this great mounded confusion was the church itself fallen in on its own foundations, and that the whole hillside, which he had taken for waste, was a town, a whole town, laid out under the grass as plain as a map to the eye that had learned to see it. A town of streets and homes and hearths and a church and a green. All of it there, all of it right there under his boots. And empty. And silent. And waiting. And something in him, some door, went open that never closed again. Because he understood, standing there in that gold light, that he was standing on the roof of a place, that beneath this quiet turf a whole world of lives had been lived, that every one of these humps had been a home with a fire in it, and voices in it, and a family that had loved it and believed it would stand forever. Hundreds of them, thousands across the centuries, born here and married here and buried here, a great and living parish, and that all of it, had gone down into the grass and been forgotten so completely that its own church was carried away for pigsties and its own name half lost, and that he, Theophilus Bray, disappointed and passed over and alone, was very likely the only man now living who had stood in this field and understood what it was, and that changed everything. Because from that evening he was no longer a man burying a place, he was a man who had fallen in love, and I mean that as plainly as I can say it. He fell in love, not with a woman, though he never married, and I think this was the great love of his life, and left no room for another, but with the vanished village, with this town that no longer was, the way a man falls in love with something he cannot have, wholly and hopelessly and for good, and love, real love, always wants the same two things. It wants to know the beloved utterly, every line of the face, every turn of the history, and it wants to keep the beloved safe, and Bray could not keep his village safe. That was the agony at the centre of it. He had come too late for that by 300 years. The stones were carried off, the people were dust. There was nothing left to save, no wall he could shore up, no roof he could mend. The thing he loved was already lost past all saving, and so all the love in him, all of it, the whole fierce hopeless flood of it, poured into the only channel left open, which was to know it completely, to set it down so wholly and so faithfully that even though he could not raise the village up out of the ground, he could raise it up out of forgetting, could hold it whole in the memory of the living, so that when the last stone was gone, the village would not also go out of the world's mind. And this became the work of his life, the whole of the rest of it, 40 years of it, and I want you to see the shape of that work, because it is one of the quietest and most beautiful labours I know of. The labour of a man loving something that could not love him back and could not be saved, and could only, by his enormous patient care, be remembered. And so he began. And where a man begins with such a thing is in the records, in the old papers, and here is where the threads of this long night begin to draw together. Because Bray got out what surviving papers there were, the manor rolls, kept in a great house in the valley, whose family had held the land since the enclosures, the court records, the accounts, and above all, the old parish register and the older parish accounts, the ones kept before the register in the medieval hand, and he found them written, most of them in a crabbed and ancient Latin, and some in the old law French of the manor courts, tongues no ordinary parson of his day could read at sight, and so he taught himself, sitting up in his cold study through the winters with a candle and a grammar, teaching his own eyes to unknot the abbreviations and the contractions and the strange shorthand of clerks 6 centuries dead, until he could read it running, until the dead hands spoke to him plainly off the page, and he copied it all of it, fair and slow into his notebook, name by name and field by field and family by family. Every soul the records held, the whole parish rising again in ink under his pen. And there came a day, and I want you to feel the weight of this, there came a day when he was working through the very oldest of the parish accounts, the ones from the plague years, from the terrible summer of the great dying, and he grew certain as a man can be of such a thing across 600 years, that he was looking at the hand of one particular clerk, one particular priest, the man who had kept the register through the pestilence, who had written in the burials in that awful season faster and faster, and then in a hand that shook, and Bray came to know that hand as you know a friend's hand, came to feel he was sitting at the man's shoulder in the cold by the same kind of candle doing the same work of remembering, 2 keepers of the same place across 6 centuries bent over the same names, and he found among those accounts, worn and faint, a line, you know the line, we have been carrying it all night. But Bray did not know it yet. Bray was the first man in 500 years to read it. A line in that shaking hand, instructing whoever should keep the parish bell after him that when, at last the village was empty, and gone the bell should be rung once for its passing, and then kept, never sold, for a place should not let its own passing go unmarked. And Bray read that line by candlelight in his lonely study, and it went through him like cold water, because he understood at once what it was, an instruction across the centuries from one keeper to whoever should come after. A hand reached forward out of the plague dark to whoever should be standing some day. Where Bray was now standing, and Bray was that man, Bray was the one it had been written to. And the terrible thing, the thing that grieved him more than almost anything in all his 40 years, was that he could not obey it, because the bell was gone, the bell was lost. When the church had fallen and been carried away, no one had rung the bell for its passing as the old clerk had asked, no one had even known to, and the bell itself had vanished, sold or buried or broken up for its metal, no one knew. So that here was a promise 6 centuries old, a small and reasonable and tender request, that a place not let its own passing go unmarked, and it had gone unkept. The village had died and no bell had tolled for it, and Bray, who would have given a great deal to be the man to keep that faith, could not, because the instrument of it was lost under the same grass that had taken everything else, and he grieved that. He wrote of it more than once, that of all he had recovered, the one thing he could not recover was the bell. The one promise he could not keep was that one, hold that grief and hold the bell, lost now but not gone. Because a bell, like a promise, can wait a long time in the dark, and so the years went on, and Bray's other labour, the labour of his feet, went on beside the labour of his pen, because he did not only read the village off the papers, he read it off the ground, walking the earthworks in every weather for 40 years, in the gold light that showed the streets and the grey light that hid them, in snow that lay in the hollows and picked out the vanished lanes in white, so that on a snowy morning the whole ghost town leapt up plain as it had not been plain in 500 years, in the long light of midsummer evenings and the flat light of November noons, pacing them, measuring them with a chain and a rod, learning to read the humps and hollows and the ridge and furrow with his feet the way another man reads a page with his eyes, until he could walk from his door blindfold, I do not doubt, and tell you here was the smithy, and here the mill race, and here the well, and here the manor, and here, and here, and here, a house, a house, a house. And whose house? Because he had the names off the rolls, and he fitted the names to the platforms as best a loving guest could fit them, so that street by street, winter by winter, the vanished village rose again on paper in his hilltop. Study, I nearly said cliff-top. I have told this story of a drowned place so often that the word came to my tongue, but no, this is a story of the high dry wold. A hilltop study. A study high up under the roof, where the wind came round the gable at night, the only whole image of that town anywhere in the world, a map drawn not from any surviving plan, for there was none, but reasoned and paced and loved into being out of the humps in the grass and the names in the rolls, the streets set down, the houses numbered, the families placed, the church restored on paper, stone by stone, from the confusion of its own fall. And I want you to sit a moment in that study with him, an old man now, or on his way to old, the lamp lit, the wind at the gable, the great map spread on the table with the weights holding down its corners, and the notebook beside it thick with the names of the dead, every soul the records held written out fair in his patient hand, and understand that this was, quite simply, the most complete act of remembering that one man could perform, that he had, alone, out of love, lifted a whole lost parish back up into the light of the living mind, and held it there, and that if he had died then, with the map made and the notebook filled, it would have been a life's work as fine as any I know. A keeper's whole faithful life given to a place that could not thank him. But the story does not end there. Because into Bray's later years, when he was grey and stiffening, and had long since given up any hope of doing more than knowing the place and setting it down, there came the young companion, and I would have you meet him. for he changes everything that is left to come. A young man, stout and cheerful and practical where Bray was spare and grave and dreaming. A curate sent up to help the old rector with the few farm families, or perhaps a young antiquarian come to see the famous earthworks the old parson had spent his life on. The records blur a little here, and it does not greatly matter which. A broad, ruddy, good-humoured young fellow. The kind who eats well and sleeps well and laughs easily and is not troubled by ghosts. Who took to the old man at once, and to the old man's great obsession, and would tramp the humps beside him in all weathers, listening to the whole vanished town conjured out of the grass. Here the lane, here the green, here the house of such a family that died out in such a year. And it was this young man, this cheerful, practical young man, with none of Bray's scholarly reverence for reading a thing only off the surface of it, who one evening, standing with the old rector among the humps in the gold light, the very light in which Bray had first seen the streets 40 years before, said the thing that no one had said in all those 40 years, the simple, practical, world-changing thing. He said, "Why do we only read the village off the humps in the grass? Why do we not open the ground and look? Why do we not dig?" And Bray, I think, stood very still when the young man said it, because in 40 years of loving that ground he had never once thought to break it, had walked it and paced it and mapped it and mourned it, but had held it, always sacred and closed, a surface to be read and never disturbed, the roof of a place. And here was this young fellow proposing, with the cheerful boldness of the young, to lift the roof, to go down, to open the sealed and sleeping ground and see with the eye and touch with the hand what Bray had only ever reasoned from the humps. And it frightened Bray a little, I do not doubt, and it thrilled him more, because somewhere in the old scholar was a man who had wanted all his life to touch the thing he loved, and had never let himself. And now here was permission. Here was a strong young back and a spade and a reason, and there was, too, hold this, for it is the hinge of everything. There was the bell, the lost bell, the one promise he could not keep. And it must have come to him in that gold light, standing among the humps, with the young man's bold word ringing in his ears, that if they opened the ground, if they went down where his 40 years of maps said the church had stood, and deeper into whatever might survive beneath it in the harder ground below, then perhaps, among all they might find, or fail to find, there was one chance, one small green chance in the dark. That the bell was not gone after all, that it had not been carried off or melted down, but had gone down. Instead, down into the ground with everything else, and lay there yet, waiting, under the grass that could not reach it. The one thing that could let a 600-year-old promise finally be kept. And so the old man, who had spent 40 years reading a town off the top of the grass, agreed at last to go down under it, and the dig was set, and I will take you down into it, all the way down into the still bright quiet of that summer day, and the cool of the deepening trench, and the hush of the deep ground, where the sounds of the living world thin away to nothing, down to the finds turned over one by one like smooth stones by the fire, and down at the very last to the sealed dark room under all that grass and the small green thing laid against its wall as a thing is. Laid that is meant to be found, but not yet, not quite yet, because the ground is not opened in a moment and you are very nearly asleep, and the opening of it deserves the whole of the next long quiet hour, so let the lamp burn lower still, and keep the old man in your mind's eye, grey and grave and trembling a little with a hope he hardly dares to hold. Standing over the humps with a spade at last in the young man's ready hands, and rest here on the edge of it, in the last stillness before the turf is lifted, for tomorrow, for in a moment, we go down. And so we come to the still centre of the night, to the one day I have been keeping back for you the way you keep back the last and best chestnut in the ashes, turning it once or twice so it should not burn, so it should be there for the end when you want it most. For I have brought you a long way over the wold, and down the long slow slope of the years, through the gold of the village alive, and the grey of the pestilence, and the 300 winters of the leaving, and I have shown you the old rector who could not save the place, and so gave his life to. Knowing it, walking the humps in the grass with his notebook, until the streets stood up again on paper in his lamplit study. And now I am going to take you, gently, gently, down into the ground itself, into the quiet under the quiet, to the day the earth was opened at last and gave back what it had been keeping. And I want you soft and warm and half asleep for it, because this is not a day of spades and labour to me. This is a day of coming to something at the bottom of a very great stillness, and you should come to it as you come to sleep, by slow degrees, letting go one hold at a time. So settle yourself now. Let the lamp burn low. You may sleep whenever you like from here on, and I will not think the less of you. But stay with me a while yet if you can, for I would like you to be there when the letters are read. It was a still bright morning in the high summer, and I will not fuss over the exact year, though Bray set it down plain enough in the notebook, and the men who came after have argued over it since. Call it the summer he had turned 70, the summer he was old and knew he was old, the summer his young companion had gone on at him for a 12-month, with that cheerful practical patience of his. Why do we only ever read the village off the top of the grass, sir? Why do we not, for once, ask the grass to stand aside and let us look? Until at last the old man had said yes, not with a leap of the heart, you understand, but the way you say yes to a thing you have wanted so long and so quietly that you have half taught yourself not to want it, for fear of the wanting. And so on that still bright morning they came up onto the wold, the two of them and a pair of hired men from the nearest farm, big, slow, patient fellows who had cut turf and dug drains and buried beasts all their lives and thought this was one more day's digging, and were only half wrong, and they carried their spades and their mattocks and a coil of rope and a couple of lanterns, though it was broad day, and a plank or two, and Bray carried nothing but his stick, and buttoned inside his coat over his heart the notebook, for he would sooner have gone up bare-headed into a hailstorm than have left the notebook behind on the one day it might be proved. And they walked out to the place his 40 years of pacing had marked, out past the market cross that was only a broken stub of stone in the turf now, along the green ghost of the main street that ran a little sunken between its low banks the way a stream runs that has long gone dry, and they stopped where the grass rose in a long low swell, a great humped shape lying east and west in the field like a sleeper under a green blanket, and Bray planted his stick in the turf and stood a moment with his hand on the head of it, and said, not loud, that here, under our boots is the church, and here the men took off their hats, though not one of them could have told you afterwards why, except that the old man had said it the way you say a thing in a church, and something in the say of it went into their hands and their hats came off of themselves. Now I want you to feel how they began, because they did not fall on it. They did not tear at it. Bray had made them promise, and the young man had made them promise, that they would go down slow, an inch at a time, like men undressing something asleep. And so the first thing that happened was the smallest thing in the world. One of the big slow men set the edge of his spade to the turf at the marked line, and cut, once a long clean cut through the living green skin of the field, and then another beside it, and a third across, and knelt, and worked his fingers under the corner of it, and lifted, and a square of turf came up whole in his two hands, grass and roots and the dark crumbling underside of it, and he laid it down careful on the sacking they had spread, grass side up, the way you lay a thing you mean to put back, and there under it was the bare brown earth of the wold, that had not seen the sun since before that man's father's father was born, breathing up its cool close smell into the warm bright morning. And they did it again and again, square after square of the green skin lifted off and laid aside in a row like folded blankets, until there was a long dark rectangle of open ground lying in the grass, like a grave that had decided to be patient about it, and then the spades went down into the soft brown fill, slow, and the first barrowloads of the years came up, worm-worked, root-threaded, dark, and were tipped in a low bank to one side, and the trench began, an inch and an inch and an inch, to sink. And here is the thing I want to give you, the thing this whole day is made of, so let me say it slow. As they went down, the world went quiet. You would not think a few feet of earth could do it, but it can, it does. Up at the top at the grass, the wold was full of the small bright noise of a summer morning, the larks going up and up out of the field and pouring their song back down, the sheep on the far slope with their steady tearing crop, and now and then a lamb's thin call. The wind moving in the long grass with that dry, ceaseless whisper it has up on the high ground, a whisper that never stops, that you stop hearing only because it never stops, and a wood pigeon somewhere in the one thorn tree, saying its 5 soft notes over and over the way it does, and the crick and jingle of the men's spades, and the young man's cheerful voice now and then. But as the trench sank, and a man was standing waist deep in it, and then shoulder deep, and then had to be handed down into it, the sounds of the world began, one by one, to go up over the edge and stay there. The lark's song thinned, the wind's whisper closed over the top of the trench like water closing over a dropped stone, and did not come down. The sheep went far away, though they had not moved, and down in the cool brown dark of the trench there was less and less to hear, until there was almost nothing, until there was only the scrape of the spade on the soil and the man's own breathing, and under everything, that great deep hush that the deep ground keeps. The hush that has been kept down there under the fields since before there were fields, the oldest quiet in England. And the men working in it went quiet themselves and stopped their talk, not because anyone told them to, but because a quiet like that gets into a man and closes his mouth for him, gently, the way a hand closes a door in a house where someone is sleeping. Bray stood at the lip of it with his hat off, and did not speak either. And I will tell you, it is very like a diving into deep water, this going down into deep ground, though the one is bright and cold, and the other is dark and cool. In both there is a leaving of the loud lit surface world, and a sinking through layers into a stillness that was there all along under our noise, and in both a man comes at last to a place where the light of the day above is only afar, pale square over his head, and everything near him is old and slow and kept. And I have thought, telling you both these stories on both these nights, that the earth and the sea are more alike than we let ourselves know, that both of them take our places away from us with the same slow patient greed, and both of them, if you go down to them humbly with a light in your hand, will show you at the bottom that they were not only taking, they were also keeping, because now the finds began, and I am going to give them to you one at a time, slow, the way Bray came to them, the way you turn smooth stones over one by one in your hand by the fire, and set each one down before you pick up the next, for there is no hurry in the ground, and there should be none in the telling. The first was a wall. The spade went down, and instead of the soft give of the fill it struck, with a small flat sound, something hard, and the man knelt and swept the loose earth away with the flat of his hand the way Bray had shown him, and there under the dirt was stone, dressed stone, squared stone, one course of it, and then another below it, laid true, laid level, running away straight into the side of the trench, so straight that any man who had spent his life among the crooked walls of nature knew in one look that no frost and no root and no chance had made this, that a hand had made this, a hand that wanted a straight line and knew how to lay stone to get one. And Bray got down onto his old knees at the edge and put his own fingers on it, on the cold true edge of the worked stone, and did not say anything for a while, because 40 years of a line on a map had just become a thing he could touch, and there are moments when a man had rather not trust his voice. That was the foundation of the south wall of the nave, he said at last, quite steady, and you could hear that it cost him to be steady. And they followed it. They opened the trench along it, and the wall ran on and on, one poor course of it left, where the robbers of 600 years had not thought it worth the carrying, and it turned a true corner, and ran again, and Bray walked the top of the field above it, reading it off in the grass with his old eyes, and calling down where the next of it would be, and it was there, it was always there. Exactly where his pacing had said, so that the men began to look at the old man a little sidelong, the way you look at someone who knows a thing he has no ordinary way of knowing. And inside the line of that wall, a spade's depth further down, they came to the floor. Now hold on to the floor, because I love the floor. It was paving, flat stones set close, a church floor, the floor that hundreds of years of feet had walked to be christened and married and buried over, and where they cleared it, in the middle where the door would have let the people in and the aisle would have led them up, the stone was worn hollow, worn into a long shallow dish by the passing of feet, by the soft, endless going to and fro of people who are all of them dead, now these 600 years, whose names not even Bray's notebook holds, but whose feet are there in the stone, are there in the hollow they wore, walking to the things that mattered to them. And Bray stood in that worn place, and I think if you had touched him just then, he might have wept, not from grief exactly, but from the nearness of it, from standing his own 2 old boots in the very dish that a whole vanished parish had worn with its own 2,000 feet, soul to soul with the dead across the years, on the one bit of ground that still, plainly, quietly remembered them. And they went on, softly, softly. They found the base of a pillar, the great round drum of stone that a pillar had stood up from, still socketed into the floor, the pillar itself long gone, but its foot there, its print there, so that Bray could stand where the pillar had been and look up into the empty summer air and see, only he could see it, the pillar rising and the arch springing across to the next, and the roof going up into its high dim dark, the whole grey inside of the church standing up around him out of nothing, out of a stump of stone and 40 years of loving it. And they found, tumbled and half sunk beside the trench, a great hollowed block that Bray named at once, with a catch in his voice, for the font. The font, where the village had been made new, child after child after child, 600 years of the first cold touch of the water, and the first bewildered cry, lying now on its side in the dirt like a thing knocked over and forgotten. And the men, without being told, gathered round it and got their hands under it, and set it upright again, set it level in the floor of the trench where it had no business being level any more, and stood back from it. And it stood there in the bottom of the pit in the ground, upright, empty, patient, as if it were only waiting, after all this time, for someone to bring it water and a child. And then, and here is the small bright wonder of that day, the thing I have been saving to give you now while you are going soft, they came to the tiles. In one corner, where the earth had lain heaviest and the robbers had not reached and the frost had not got down, they cleared the fill away, and there was a patch of the medieval floor still keeping its skin of tiles, and when the last of the dirt was brushed off them with the soft edge of a hand, they were bright. They were coloured. After 600 years in the black ground they came up yellow and green and a deep red-brown, glazed, glowing, with the old pattern still on them, the running vine and the little heraldic beasts, and the crossed lines the tilers had pressed into the wet clay before ever the church was old. And they were bright, brighter, Bray said, and he was right, brighter than any tile still up in the light of any church you could walk into that day, because up in the light the sun and the years fade a thing, wear it, pale it, but down here in the dark the sun could not get at them, and so the dark had kept them fresh, had kept their colour for them like a promise, all those centuries, against the day someone should come down with a lantern and lift them again into the light they were made for, and I want you to lie there and hold that, because it is the truest thing I know about the ground, and I think it may be the truest thing I know about anything, that the same dark that swallows a place will also, in its own slow patient way, keep it, that the earth, like the sea, does not only destroy, it preserves, it destroys the roof and keeps the tile, it destroys the wall and keeps the print of the wall, it takes the whole bright village up into itself, and holds it, buried, safe, incorrupt in the one place the fading world cannot reach, and gives it back, colour and all, to the one man patient enough and loving enough to come down and ask. And through all of this the men had grown very gentle. I have seen it, and Bray wrote of it, how men who had begun the day thinking they were digging a hole came by the afternoon to move about that opened ground softly on the balls of their feet, hats off, speaking low when they spoke at all, how one of the big, slow farm men, coming on a slab that he took for a grave cover, straightened up and said, not to Bray, not to anyone, just said out loud into the quiet, "Easy now." And it was not clear whether he meant easy to his own hands or easy to whoever slept beneath, and it did not matter. It was the same word for both. How they nodded to the things they uncovered, to the font and the worn floor and the foot of the pillar, nodded the way you nod to an old body you pass in a lane, a small respecting nod that says, "I see you, I mean you no harm, I know whose place this is." For they had understood, somewhere down in that trench where the sounds of the world could not follow them, that they were not thieves in that ground. They were not robbing the dead. They were calling on them. They had come down, humbly, with a light, into the house of some very old and very quiet neighbours, and they went about it as you go about a house where the family is only sleeping, softly, and with your hat in your hand, and saying easy now to the dark. And then they came to the bold thing, the deep thing, the thing Bray's maps had promised at the very bottom, and that he had hardly dared believe. For his reading of the old rolls had told him that under the east end of that church, under the altar cut down into the harder rock where the soft brown fill gave way, there had been a low vaulted room, an undercroft, a crypt, a stone cellar of the dead where the parish had laid, in the good days, those it most wished to keep near the holy place, and where a stone room is cut into the living rock and roofed with a stone vault. That room does not fall as the church above it falls. That room holds. That room can lie sealed and dry and whole in the dark under all the ruin and all the grass, while 600 summers come, and go over the top of it, and never once get in. And they found the steps. Down in the deepest corner of the trench a man's spade found, not the flat of a floor, but the edge of a step going down, and then another below it, worn steps, a little stair curling down into the rock and into a dark that the summer day above could not reach the bottom of, and they cleared them. 3, 4, 5 worn steps, and at the foot of them, half choked with the silt of centuries, a low doorway, and beyond the doorway you could feel it before you could see it. A room, a held room, a kept room. The one place under all that grass that had never fallen and never filled and never let the years in. And here everything went very still, even the young man's cheerful voice, because now there was a dark to go into, a real dark, an ancient sealed dark, and someone would have to go down into it with a light. And it was the young companion who took the lantern, of course it was. It was the stout, cheerful, practical one, the one who had wanted the digging, and it was right that he should be the one to go. And I think Bray was glad, in his old bones, not to have to be the first into that room, glad to stand at the top of the worn steps in the daylight, with his hand on the head of his stick, and let the young man carry the flame down for him. So the young man lit the lantern, struck the match and set it to the wick, and it caught and steadied, and it looked absurd for a moment, a lit lantern in the blaze of a summer afternoon, until he stepped down into the doorway, and the dark took the daylight off him, and the lantern was suddenly the only light in the world, and he went down the worn steps slow, one hand on the cold rock wall, the lantern held out before him, and his head went below the level of the field, and then his shoulders, and then he was gone into it, down under the grass, down under the church, down into the one still dark room that 600 years had not opened, and there was a long silence up above. And the men leaned on their spades and did not breathe, and Bray stood at the top with his old heart going, and from down in the dark there came, after a while, the young man's voice, changed, hushed, come down out of all its cheerfulness into a kind of wonder, saying only, "Oh, just that. Oh, for this is what he saw, and I will give it to you slowly, for it is the deepest and stillest thing in all the night, and you should have it slow." He saw a low room, no higher than a tall man, roofed with a stone vault that curved down to squat pillars, dry as a bone, the air of it old and close and clean, an air that had not stirred since the last living hand pulled the last door to, and the lantern light going out from him across the floor found, one after another, a handful of stone coffins, a few, only a few, the great box tombs of the parish's cherished dead, lying in a little silt of the ages, undisturbed, unrobbed, unbroken, their heavy lids still on, lying there in a row in the dark as they had been laid. And he moved the lantern slowly over them, along the row, the light sliding over one long stone lid, and then the next and the next. And he told Bray afterwards. And Bray wrote it down, and I have read it, that he could not for his life go quickly. That he moved the light over those old stone sleepers the way you carry a candle across a room where children are sleeping slow and shading it a little with your hand, so as not to wake them. That it did not feel like a place of the dead at all. It felt like a nursery of the very old and very tired. A place where a great many people who had walked and worked and grieved and worn that floor above smooth with their feet had at last been allowed to lie down out of the weather and the years and be quiet, and he had come in among them with his little light and his loud living heart, and he found that all he wanted, down there, was to be gentle, was to not disturb, was to hold the light steady and let them go on sleeping. And then, at the far end of the room, laid against the end wall, he found the last thing, and he stopped, and it was after this that he said, "Oh, into the dark." For there, on its side, against the cold stone at the very end of the crypt, set down carefully, you could see it had been set, not dropped, not fallen, but laid. Laid the way you lay a thing you mean to be safe, laid the way you lay a thing you mean. One far day, to be found, there was a bell. A small bell, a hand's span and a little more across the mouth of it, a parish bell, a sanctus bell, bronze gone all green and dark and dim, with the long centuries in the dark, but whole, unbroken. Sound, its curved shoulder and its flared lip and the loop at its crown, all there, all perfect, lying on its side in the silt at the foot of the wall, as if someone had carried it down here in the last days, in the very last days, when the church above was emptying and the end was plainly coming, and had thought, "Not this. This at least I will not let them take, and I will not let it lie up there to be sold for its metal or broken for scrap or carried off over the wold. I will bring it down here into the deep-kept room where the church's own dear dead are lying, and I will lay it beside them, safe in the dark, and I will trust, because there is nothing left to do but trust, that some day, some far day, I will not live to see. Someone will love this dead place enough to come down into the ground after it, and find it, and know it, and lift it back up into the light, and do at last the thing it was cast to do." And the young man did not touch it. He had the sense, that good practical stout young man, to leave it lying, and to call up the worn steps, in a voice gone very quiet, for Bray to come. And the old man came down. Of course he came down. He had waited 40 years to come down. He was 70 and his knees were bad and his hands shook, and none of it mattered. He came down the worn steps into the dark, with the young man's hand steadying his elbow, down into the low-kept room among the sleeping stone, and the young man held the lantern, and Bray went to the end wall, and he knelt in the silt of 600 years, knelt. An old man in the dark under a field, knelt as you kneel, and he looked at the bell. And for a long while he only looked. And then, with the young man holding the light close and steady, the old rector reached out his two old shaking scholar's hands, the hands that had copied the parish rolls fair by lamplight for 40 years, the hands that had traced the vanished streets on paper street by street, and he laid them on the cold green bell, gently. The way you lay your hands on a thing you have loved a long time before you ever saw it. And he turned it a little, tenderly toward the light, and there around the shoulder of it, cast into the bronze by some village founder 600 years gone, crusted and green and dim, but there, unmistakably there, going round and round the curve of it, were letters, words, a line of the old Latin, cut for the ear of God and the parish, and never meant, surely, for the ear of a man kneeling in the dark 6 centuries on. And Bray took out his handkerchief, and wetted it at his old lips, and began, with the tip of one shaking finger, to clean the crust of the ages very softly out of the graven letters, one letter at a time, leaning close, his old eyes near blind in the lantern light, reading with his finger where he could not read with his eyes, feeling the shapes of the words the founder had pressed into the metal before ever the plague came, before ever the sheep ate the men, before ever the first family carried its door away over the wold. And the young man held the light and did not breathe. And up above at the top of the steps the two big slow farm men had come to the edge of the trench and taken off their hats again, and stood looking down into the ground where the small light was. And the whole bright wold went on being summer over their heads, the larks, the wind, the sheep, all of it up there in the light, and none of it down here in the dark, where the old man's finger moved along, the cold green line of the letters. And I will tell you what the letters said. I promised you I would, and I will, but let me hold it just one breath more. For a thing that has waited 600 years in the dark to be read can wait while you draw one slow breath in the warm. There now Bray cleaned the last of the crust from the last of the words, and lifted the bell a little into the light. And read them out, aloud, slowly, his old voice not quite steady, into the deep-kept hush of that room under the grass, with the sleeping stone all round and the young man's lantern shining, and the dead of the parish lying quiet to hear. And turned into our own plain speech. The words that went round the shoulder of the buried bell of the lost village were these. I called them living. I told them home,